funded Streams project and the GIC funded Aquaculture Aqualink research project. Also involved some researchers cited here from World Fish, Penang, Egypt, and El Zanati Associates in enumeration. So in Egypt, between 2000 and 2017, official statistics recorded a rise in per capita fish supply from 14.04 kg per year to 28.8 kg per year. This is despite population increase from 67.5 million to 97.5 million, with a 44% population increase in that period. And then obviously the related economic and environmental externalities placing pressure on per capita figures. So what is filling this gap in supply and demand? This is a success story of the Egyptian fish production that I want to talk about today. So next slide. First slide before that. Just some content to show what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to show you some figures about fish production, per capita supply. Then we're going to move on to national demand and price trends, looking at national wholesale statistics and also focusing on bottom of the pyramid markets. And then thirdly, I'm going to show you some results from the most up-to-date fish consumption survey, which was conducted in October 2017. Alright, so next slide. So here we can see from 2015 at the bottom, there was an increase from almost 1 million metric tons to 2 million metric tons. And that is an aggregate of what you can see on the right of all contributors to national fish supply. What has changed drastically in its share of contribution to national supply, capture fisheries, you can see, dropped from 39%, 384,314 metric tons, to only 18%. Now, in addition, net imports dropped from 26% to 14%, meaning a reduction in Egypt's fish deficit. So that's again a success story. Now, in contrast, aquaculture has expanded rapidly. Overall, the industry accounts for 77.34% of the country's national fish production and 60.33% of the total per capita supply. Greatest growth has come from farmed tilapia. So you can see there what's changed between 2000 to 2015, the green section of the pie chart. So, substantial, considering the policy reports that we've done with public sector, there has been substantial public investments in the 1980s which gave that crucial kickstart to this through support for capacity building and development of public hatcheries, multiplication centres and seed and feed infrastructure. And then subsequent policy reforms in the 1990s led to private sector development of seed production, selective breeding programs, as well as feed and seed distribution. So as a result, the developments of tilapia genetic improvement programs have provided further catalyst to this increase in national production. Among them, the Capital Shake commercial tilapia strain and the Generation 9 of the Abasa tilapia strain, the latter of which records a 28% improved growth rate and a reduction in feed conversion ratio from 1.8 to 1.48. So there we are, increased efficiency in farmers. Next slide. So, national fish production in metric tons from 2000 to 2015. So while capture fisheries have stagnated with a slight overall decline, the aquaculture has risen roughly from 0.38 million to 1.7 million metric tons. Tilapia aquaculture has risen from 1.5 million metric tons to is that right? 1.7 million metric tons? No, that's incorrect. Let me see. Sorry? As far as I can remember, it's...
This is the right value.
This is the right value.
But the biggest one is very high.
Okay.
In 2015, we were producing only 1,400,000 tons.
I'm talking about tilapia aquaculture specifically, but I need to check my figures. So thank you for your correction. The bulk of this output is coming from 4 governorates: Kafr al-Sheikh, Sharqiya, Port Said and Bahira, and in 2015 they produced 68.33% of total tilapia farming output. Can we go to the next slide? Now, if we look at wholesale price trends, what are all these changes in production and supply doing to demand and consumption, and then price trends, which is an indicator of this? We can look specifically at, significant increases in real market prices of gilt bream, the black line there. And this is all in EGP per kg, recorded from National Annual Statistics of Elabor Auction House. But take a look at tilapia products specifically. So we've split them up into grade 1, 2, and 3. There's also premium tilapia, which you can look at, but we're focusing here on these 3. This bottom of the pyramid market has become highly diversified by price differentials in different graded products. In this period, real market prices for grade 1 increased only by 37.5%, while grade 3 increased by 55.7%. So that represents greater demand, or a reduction in supply to the market. We still need to understand that. But regardless, the fact that this is a highly diversified bottom of the pyramid market, it posits that there are noteworthy opportunities for genetic selection programs to respond to these differentiated demand and preferences in that market. Now, what's the question? The question is, how do we evaluate the economic and social importance of specific morphometric tilapia traits to breeding programs? Can we go to the next slide? So what we did, in 2017, I'm going to run through quickly a study design. We conducted a study of fish consumption intra-household fish preferences using a multi-stage budgeting framework and a trait rankings analysis. We interviewed a total of 740 households, lower income, using purposely stratified sampling strategy, and that was, among them, 474 women respondents and 265 men respondents. The key questions to this study were, what are present levels of farm tilapia consumption and patterns among resource-poor households across Lower Egypt, Cairo, and Upper Egypt? Again, think about the geographical concentration of tilapia production in Egypt. Question 2. What are the tilapia trait preferences among resource-poor households, and how do these differ significantly, either by gender, wealth, or location, and again, why? So, we screen the sample into socioeconomic status groups by labour, education, consumption, and asset-based indicators. We screen the sample into gender equity scoring using the USAID WEA index, using normative responses relating to 5 domains of disempowerment considered relevant to the Egyptian cultural context. We then use 1 month and 7-day recalls to look at household food and non-food consumption expenditures, and eventually we did a quantitative tilapia ranking, specifically targeting, like I said, the morphometric tilapia traits and attribute preferences of resource-poor men and women consumers. So the first set of rankings, if we go to the next slide, you can see some of the tools that we used here. We were trying to present to the consumers these fish prototypes, because really this is what genetic selection programs should be thinking about, and they are thinking about. And this is the opportunity that I'm trying to present today here, is different product lines, different improved strains that respond to these. So looking at the morphometric traits, we used some of your survey tools as picture references. We did first a set of questions asking people to rank their favorite 6 morphometric traits, and then a second question asking, among those 6 traits, what were their 24 attributes, and to rank them. So can we move again? This is something like the survey tool that we used. Can we go to the results now, fish consumption expenditure? I'm just going to show you this slide, and you can basically see that not everybody was eating fish in the previous week, only 49.7%, but there is big spatial distribution here. For example, most southern governorates, Minia, 10% of households consuming fish in the last week, 11.8% in Aswan, compared to Lower Egypt, which has an aggregate of 75.9% of households consuming fish. Upper Egypt was only 24.4%. So, you know, a tiny proportion of the sample in those regions, Upper Egypt regions, eating tilapia. Can we go to the next slide? Here's just a bar graph to show you some of the distribution of the households who were consuming fish. And can we go now to the next results? Next slide. Okay. Exploring priority tilapia trait rankings, we do not find statistical difference in the ranking scores by gender. You can see on the left here, these are the priority traits. Now we included a few qualitative traits, but we are focusing here only on the morphometric traits. However, we do find more significant difference in ranking scores by governorate and region. So you see on the right there, Cairo, Sharqiya, Kafr Sheikh, Bahir, Fayoum, Mania, and Aswan. So size, again, is still the most important, but there's huge variation. For example, in Minia, size is massively important to households. We need to understand what do they like about households. So next slide. This is the raw data. So the 24 trait values, we asked them to rank from a scale of 1 to 5. These are the mean scores. We did an ANOVA test using Kruskal-Wallis, the Kruskal-Wallis, to do an analysis of ranks that we considered appropriate for non-parametric methods for comparing multiple groups of different sizes, because you can see the sizes are not distributed equally. And we show at least one sample stochastically dominates one other sample. It's a bit small to see, but in summary we see not frequent significant mean difference between gender, but there is again by location and region. So, targeting here, we aggregated mean ranking scores to create fish preference models, so either larger fish or smaller fish from those 24 ranks. Longer fish, shorter fish, thicker fish, slimmer fish. And you can see by location there's huge significance differences in their mean rankings. Now, to understand this a bit better, we did some Poisson regression analyses. First, look at a nominal category predictors on the dependent variable, on the outcome variable of the larger fish model. So what's this saying here is, okay, omnibus test to see the significance, and there the test of the model to see if there is a significant difference between governors. We left regions because samples cross over. Now, if we move to the yellow boxes, we can see that compared to Upper Egypt, Lower Egypt is 22% times less likely to prefer larger fish. Now this is a bit contradictory. I don't understand why yet. If we're to compare to Aswan, for example, Fayoum, that's spelled wrong, Minia are 70%, respectively, 11% times less likely and 71% times less likely to buy larger fish. So there's big differences in who's buying large fish. Now, if we can understand it better by different response variables or predictors, we use the same Poisson regression model. We see that the omnibus test of the model is significant. And what are the significant predictors for people to buy larger fish? Employment, SES scoring, and household size. Now this is interesting. So, for household size, people with larger households are 13.8% more likely to buy or prefer larger fish model. considering SES scoring, those with high SES scoring are 20% less likely to buy large fish model. Looking at employed and unemployed, and this is where I think it's very interesting, the employed are 43% times more likely to buy larger fish model. That makes sense. That makes kind of straightforward sense.
Okay, can you start to wrap up so we have time for the rest of the speakers?
Yeah, that's my last slide. Okay, so now smaller fish model is interesting. Again, the predictor variables here are the same socioeconomic variables, and we can see children in education is significant and household size is significant. And I want to focus in on here children in school. So children in school are 60% times more likely to buy smaller fish. So obviously smaller fish is a preference for households with certain dietary needs for their children. Here, just to give you very descriptive statistics, these are the preferences by governors. Look at, for example, Minia, they have a higher preference for the smaller fish, and then you can see with preferences on the bottom. And then these are some of the reasons that these households said that they like to buy fish. If you want to talk to me about where some of these statistics came from or references, please get in touch. I just didn't have time to give you a list of citations.
Okay.
So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Management interventions in Lake Nasser, improving fish production and food security in Upper Egypt.
Okay, good afternoon. My presentation today is about fisheries management interventions in Lake Nasser, and the aim of the management plan we are drafting now for Lake Nasser is to improve fish production and food security. I will talk today about fish and food security in general, then with fish production of Egypt and the Upper Egypt. We'll talk about captured fisheries in Upper Egypt, Lake Nasser and its fisheries activities, stock assessment of Lake Nasser fishes, and finally about the management plan for Lake Nasser fisheries, the method, the purpose, and the objectives. Generally, fish is very nutritious food, rich in numerous micronutrients. Sometimes for some communities it's the main source of protein. Maybe because it's the most available, cheapest source of protein. This one side, and the other side, the industry itself, the sector, provide the income for many communities, which increase their food security. The contribution of fisheries and aquaculture to food security and nutrition now and in the future is driven by many interactions between several environmental development and policy and the governance issues. If we have a very quick look at the Egyptian fish production, you can see from the figures there the main source of fish in Egypt now is the aquaculture. It's a little bit more than 80%. Now we are very close to average, the global average of consumption per capita. Now Egypt, if we depend on local production only, is more than 18%. If we added the imported fish, we are more than the average, the global average by 21.64 kilogram per capita. But if we have a close look to Upper Egypt, we find a different image, that most of the production of Upper Egypt, the south part of Egypt, is coming from captured fishes, the table on the left. The aquaculture only concentrated in Fayoum, which is the northmost part of the Upper Egypt, but all other governorates, the most south ones like Sohag, Ina, Luxor, Aswan, are made completely dependent on captured fisheries. And if we have some details of these captured fisheries, they are artisanal, small scale, they represent only 15% of the total captured fisheries production in Egypt, which is 3% of the total fish production. The majority of regulated fisheries production in Upper Egypt is coming from Lake Nasser. The source in Upper Egypt is River Nile, Lake Nasser, some water bodies in New Valley, and Lake Qarun in Fayoum. But most of this the production is coming from Lake Nasser in Aswan. Lake Nasser is a huge water body formed after building the high dam in late 1960s. Its area is around 7,000 kilometers square. It's in the heart of the desert, no communities around it. So if we look to the other slide, 14,000 fishers are working there, are coming from Upper Egypt Governorate, Sohag, Hena, Aswan of course. This 14,000 fishers working on more than 3,000 boats, small boats from 4.5 to 9 meters. The fishing right in Lake Nasser is very unique in Egypt. Maybe it's the only system, following this regime is in Lake Nasser, because it's divided geographically between one company, Masra Aswan, and the 4 fisheries association, أبناء أسوان، الأم، التكامل، وأبناء النوبة. Fish production from Lake Nasser is mainly consists of tilapia species, around 67%, night perch 8%, other salted fish, the salted fish processing depending on belly fish and tiger fish. If we have a look at the fish production of Lake Nasser, as we see here, it has been steadily declining since the late 90s. In 1998, it was more than 50,000 tons. Now, in 2016, it's less than 19,000. So, what is the problem? Why the production of the lake is declining? As a part of youth employment in Aswan Governorate project, run by World Fish and sponsored by SDC, we had a study on the stock assessment of Lake Nasser from mid of 2016 to 2017, and we published our results. We discussed our results with all the stakeholders. One of the main issues was concerning the operational requirements under which the fishery is currently being exploited. That's why in the next step we go with preparation of management plan for Lake Nasser fisheries. This management plan adapted the ecosystem approach to fisheries, the EEF. A series of stakeholders workshops were held to develop this work plan. All the stakeholders were participated in these workshops to come up with this plan. 2 aims. The first one is to ensure that the fishery resources are exploited within biological acceptable level, as well for the first time to manage fisheries there, the social and economic purposes. That's why we adopted the EF system, because most of the management measures before were focusing on biological one, the stock. But this time we consider the social and economic services of the lake and how to sustain it and to conserve it. The other thing is for the first time to provide a foundation for management of the fishery to continue moving toward a more integrated management framework of shared responsibilities. Because most of the decisions, the acts, the decrees related to the fishing in the lake was issued by GAFRD. For this time, we want the GAFRD and other stakeholders to take part in the decision and in the responsibility. One of the main, the first objective of the plan was food security. The plan was aiming to, one of its major first objective is to maintain access to sufficient resources for local population and to ensure food security. We already drafted the management plan. We have a final draft which will be discussed tomorrow in Aswan with the stakeholders, and we expect in the next step for GAFR to formalize this plan to be an example of participatory management of fisheries in Egypt and land fisheries in Egypt. And we hope that we did a step to stop the decline of Lake Nasser fisheries, and we hoping that its production will increase again, which meaning the provide food security for the local communities in there. Thank you.